my father died, I kept waiting for it to feel real. 6 months later, it still hadn't. Dad was the kind of man who fixed things, leaky faucets, broken bikes, broken people. The kind of man who showed up at 2 a.m. with a toolbox and no questions. And now he was gone, and I was standing in my kitchen eating cereal for dinner when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Daniel Harrow?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. My name is Patricia Ng. I'm the accountant your father used for the past 12 years. I'm sorry for your loss. I've been meaning to reach out, but your father was very specific about timing." She paused. "He left instructions for me to contact you exactly 6 months after his passing. He left you something, a sealed envelope. He said, and I want to read this exactly as he wrote it, 'Open it only after your brother-in-law offers to buy the shop.'" I set down my spoon. "My brother-in-law," I said slowly. "Marcus." "That's correct. Has he made such an offer?" I didn't answer right away because the truth was Marcus had called me 3 days ago. Casual, friendly, the way he always was. "Hey Danny, I've been thinking, now that your dad's gone, maybe it makes sense to just liquidate Harrow Auto. I know a buyer. Clean deal. You walk away with something in your pocket instead of a headache." I'd told him I'd think about it. Now my stomach was dropping somewhere through the floor. "Yes," I said quietly. He did. Patricia's voice stayed even. "Then it's time. I'll courier the envelope to you tomorrow. Your father also asked me to tell you one more thing." Another pause. He said, "Don't sign anything until you open it, and don't tell Marcus." The envelope arrived the next afternoon. My wife Claire was at work. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my father's handwriting on the front, "For Daniel, when it's time." His penmanship was always so careful, so deliberate, every letter like he meant it. I turned it over and broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, a small key with a paper tag, and a photograph of my father and me at the shop. I was maybe 8 years old, holding a wrench twice the size of my hand and grinning like I'd won something. On the back of the photo, in the same careful handwriting, "You always knew how things worked. Trust that." I unfolded the letter. "Daniel, if you're reading this, Marcus has already come to you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. I didn't have enough time, and I didn't have enough proof. But I have it now. The key is for the lockbox at First Heritage Bank on Clement Street. Box 447. Everything is inside. The shop is worth more than Marcus has ever let you believe. Go see for yourself before you let anyone tell you what it's worth. I love you, son. Be smarter than your old man was." I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still for a long moment. Marcus had been married to my sister Renee for 9 years. He was the kind of man who laughed at all the right moments, who remembered your favorite beer, who gave toasts at Christmas that made your grandmother cry. He'd helped run Harrow Auto's books for the last 4 years, unofficially as a favor, because Renee said he was good with numbers, and Dad had trusted him the way you trust family without checking. I had too. I drove to First Heritage Bank the next morning before Marcus called again. Box 447 held a thick manila folder, a USB drive, and a handwritten ledger that looked nothing like the financial summaries Marcus had been sending my father for years. I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened the folder. It took me 40 minutes to understand what I was looking at. Then it took me another 20 to stop shaking. Marcus had been running a second set of books on Harrow Auto for at least 3 years. The real revenue numbers were nearly double what he'd been reporting to my father. The difference? Money that should have gone to the shop, to payroll, to my father's retirement account, had been quietly moved into a company called Crestline Consulting LLC, registered in Nevada, with Marcus listed as sole member. There were bank statements, wire transfer records, emails printed and paper clips together. My father had done this slowly, carefully, the way he did everything. I opened the USB drive that night after Claire fell asleep. It held audio recordings. I put in one earbud and pressed play. My father's voice, low, steady, and Marcus's voice answering. "The quarterly numbers are down again, Ray. I know it's hard to hear, but the market for independent shops is just tough right now. My father, Patricia, ran different numbers last week." A beat of silence. "Patricia's not a forensic accountant, Ray. She's just a bookkeeper. I don't want her getting confused and stressing you out when you're already dealing with the chemo." My blood went cold. There were 6 recordings. My father had made them over 14 months, slipping a small digital recorder into his shirt pocket before every meeting with Marcus. In one of them, Marcus laughed and said the shop would probably clear $140,000 that year. Patricia's real numbers showed it cleared $260,000. In the last recording, made 2 weeks before my father went into hospice, Marcus's voice was different. Quieter, more careful. "I'm just saying, when the time comes, a clean sale makes things easier for everyone. For you, for Renee, for Danny. No mess." My father said, "I'll think about it." And then, very quietly, almost like he was talking to himself, "I already have." I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a long time. Dad had known. He had been sick and exhausted and watching the man who married his daughter drain his life's work, and he had spent his last months quietly, patiently building a case, not for himself, for me. I thought about Marcus at the funeral, the way he'd stood with his arm around Renee and shaken hands with everyone who came through the line. The way he'd pulled me aside afterward and said, "You know I'm here for whatever you need, Danny. Your dad was like a father to me." I nearly put my fist through the wall. But I heard my father's voice in my head, the way I always did when I was about to do something stupid. Measure twice, cut once. That was his rule for everything. Wood, people, decisions. You don't swing until you're sure of the cut. So I didn't call Marcus back. I texted him that I was still thinking, that the estate stuff was taking longer than expected, that I'd circle back by the end of the month. He sent back a thumbs up emoji and a no rush man. "Take all the time you need." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I started working. I brought everything to Patricia first. She spent 3 hours with the ledger and the bank statements and came out of her office looking like she'd aged a year. "Daniel," she said carefully, "this isn't just skimming. This is systematic fraud. He was using the shop's vendor accounts to run dummy invoices through Crestline. Your father was paying for services that were never rendered." "How much?" She looked at her notepad. "Over 3 years, conservatively, just under $400,000. I had to breathe through my nose for a moment. "Okay," I said. "What do I need to do?" She told me. I did it. Over the next 2 weeks, I retained a forensic accountant named Howard Briggs, who had spent 20 years doing fraud investigation for the IRS before going private. Howard went through every document my father had left, and then requested 3 years of bank records through the attorney I'd also quietly hired. I told no one. I went to Sunday dinners at Renee and Marcus's house and ate pot roast and listened to Marcus talk about a restaurant he wanted to invest in and nodded at the right moments and said nothing. One Sunday, Marcus walked me to my car. "Heard from any buyers yet?" he asked, hands in his pockets, easy smile. "Still thinking," I said. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Smart. Don't let anyone lowball you. You know I'll make sure you get a fair deal." I smiled back. "I know you will," I said. I drove home and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes. Howard called me on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks in. "We have enough," he said simply. That afternoon, I met with my attorney, a woman named Sandra Okafor who had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed dismantling people who deserved it. She laid out the timeline. We had documentation for fraudulent invoicing, wire transfer abuse, and what Howard believed was a separate scheme where Marcus had listed Crestline Consulting as a legitimate business vendor to 2 other family-owned shops he previously helped advise. Harrow Auto wasn't the only victim. "When do you want to move?" Sandra asked. "End of the week," I said. "Give me 2 days first." I called Renee that Thursday evening. It was the hardest call I've ever made. I drove to her house, sat across from her at the kitchen table, and laid down every document in order. I watched my sister's face change in real time, confusion, then disbelief, then the particular stillness of someone whose world is reorganizing itself around a new and terrible truth. She didn't cry right away. She just kept picking up the bank statements and setting them back down. "How long have you known?" she finally asked. 3 weeks. "Dad knew?" "Dad spent his last year building the case." She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Where is he right now?" "Golf," I said. "He'll be home around 7. She nodded slowly. Okay. Marcus walked through the front door at 7:04 p.m. I was sitting in the living room. His smile dropped the second he saw me. Danny, didn't know you were coming by. Sit down, Marcus. He looked at Renee. She didn't look back at him. I put Howard's summary on the coffee table and slid it toward him. He looked at it without touching it. $400,000, I said. 3 years. Dummy invoices run through Crestline. Vendor accounts you controlled. And the shop's been profitable enough to have funded Dad's retirement twice over, which he never got to see because you were bleeding it out. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation, Danny. It's not an accusation. It's a forensic audit. I kept my voice level the way my father would have. Sandra Okafor filed the civil complaint this morning. The DA's office received a referral this afternoon, and 2 other shop owners in Marin County were contacted by Howard Briggs today about their own books. The color left Marcus's face. You can't, he started. I already did. I stood up. Dad measured twice. Marcus looked at Renee one more time. She had her hands folded in her lap and was staring at the middle distance, somewhere past both of us. Renee, he said. You need to leave, she said quietly. Tonight. He stood there for another moment, and I watched the calculations run across his face. The angles, the outs, the ways to spin it. Then something in him seemed to understand that there was no spin left. Sandra had seen to that. He left. The civil case moved faster than anyone expected, partly because Marcus made the mistake of attempting to transfer assets from the Nevada LLC within 48 hours of being served, which Sandra had anticipated and blocked. The criminal referral took longer, but 3 months later, Marcus was charged with wire fraud and financial elder abuse, the last charge carrying additional weight because my father had been terminally ill during the period of the fraud. The shop is still open. I hired a real operations manager, a woman named Diane who had run 2 shops in Oakland and knew more about fleet accounts than anyone I'd ever met. In the first full quarter under clean books, Harrow Auto netted more than it had in any quarter for the past 4 years. Renee filed for divorce in January. She doesn't talk about Marcus, and I don't push it. What I do know is that she came to the shop on a Saturday about a month after everything settled, and she changed the oil on her car herself the way Dad had taught us both when we were kids. She didn't say much. When she was done, she wiped her hands on a shop rack and looked around the garage like she was seeing it for the first time. He would have liked this, she said. Yeah, I said. He would. There was something else, though. Something that happened about 6 weeks after Marcus left that I haven't been able to fully explain. I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Handwritten on plain paper, in handwriting I didn't recognize right away. And then did. Because I'd been staring at it on bank ledgers for weeks. It was one line. Check the storage unit on Delancey. Unit 14. He kept the originals. I went the next morning. The lock took the same key that had opened the bank box. Inside was a storage unit with 2 filing cabinets, a folding table, and a corkboard covered in printed emails and handwritten notes. My father's handwriting was everywhere. He had been building this longer than I knew. There were files going back 5 years, notes on conversations, printed screenshots, a timeline on a legal pad that started with the words, "First time something felt wrong." He hadn't just left me a case. He had left me a roadmap. Tucked into the back of the second cabinet was a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and another photograph. The photograph was the 2 of us at my college graduation, me in the stupid cap and gown, him in his good jacket, both of us squinting into the sun. On the back, in his handwriting, I was always prouder of you than I knew how to say. Fix what I couldn't. Dad. I stood in that storage unit for a long time. People ask me sometimes if I feel like justice was served. I tell them the honest answer, which is that justice isn't a clean thing. Marcus will spend years in court. Some of the money may never be fully recovered. My sister is rebuilding a life she didn't ask to rebuild. My father is still gone, and no verdict changes that. But Harrow Auto is still standing. The sign out front still says what it's always said, and somewhere in the records we keep now. Clean records, real numbers. There's a line that traces back to a man who measured twice, who built things carefully, who trusted that the truth would hold the weight you put on it, if you gave it enough time. He was right. He always was. People asked me if I feel like justice was served, and I always pause before I answer, because the honest answer is more complicated than yes or no. What I know is this: Marcus didn't lose everything because I was clever. He lost everything because he made a fundamental error that people who operate through deception almost always make. He assumed that the people around him were not paying attention. He assumed that a sick, tired man running a small auto shop in a neighborhood nobody famous had ever heard of would be too overwhelmed, too distracted, too beaten down by his own illness to notice what was being taken from him. He was wrong. My father was paying attention every single day. He just never let Marcus know it. That's the thing about integrity that I didn't fully understand until I was standing in that storage unit reading my father's notes. Integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when people are watching. It's about doing the disciplined, unglamorous, painstaking work even when you're exhausted, even when you're scared, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. My father was dying, and he was still measuring twice. He was still building something that would outlast him, not because he knew it would work, but because he believed that careful, honest work was worth doing regardless. Daniel, the version of me who existed before I opened that envelope, had been sleepwalking. I was grieving, and I was passive, and I was about to hand over everything my father spent 30 years building. Because someone I trusted had framed the story in a way that made giving up feel like the sensible choice. That's how it works. It's rarely dramatic at first. It starts with someone making you feel like the thing you love is a burden, like moving on is wisdom, like letting go is strength. And by the time you realize what's actually being taken, you've already signed something. My father's real gift to me wasn't the documents or the recordings or the forensic ledger, as critical as all of those were. His real gift was the example. He showed me what it looks like to stay clear-headed under pressure, to resist the pull toward shortcuts and assumptions, to let the truth build itself slowly instead of forcing a confrontation before you're ready. That kind of discipline is not exciting. It doesn't make a good story in the moment, but it is the difference between winning and losing almost everything that matters. I think about what it cost him, the energy he spent in his last months on that corkboard, those file cabinets, those careful recordings, when he could have been resting. And I don't experience that as sad anymore, though it was for a long time. I experience it as the most precise definition of love I've ever encountered. He used what he had left to protect what he'd built, and the people he was leaving behind. That was his choice, made freely, made quietly, made without any guarantee that it would work. Harrow Auto is still standing. The sign still says what it always has. And I show up every morning and I try to be as careful as he was. That's all any of us can really do.